With that, let's turn it back over to you, Christine, and we can dig into the mental well-being aspect that you brought. And it looks like we have a guest here as well. So
We sure do. I will introduce our guest in a minute. I just wanted to do a little front end on where we are at UTO around wellness and well-being. Next slide, please. So a couple of years ago, the health and wellness, what at that time was a work stream and now has become a community of practice, went out to the CDC and got this definition of wellness as a dynamic process of learning new life skills and becoming aware of and making conscious choices toward a more balanced and healthy lifestyle across 7 dimensions. So if you go out there and look at the literature, these 7 dimensions show up in various forms in all kinds of models. Next slide, please. But UTO came to this conclusion that these are the 8 dimensions of wellness that they are programming around and creating practices around. And financial is the one that they added that wasn't in the CDC's dimensions of wellness. Next slide, please. So well-being is another term that's a little bit different than wellness. It's not just about health. It's holistic. It takes the entire person, body, mind, spirit into account. And it's way more than just the absence of illness. There's been quite a movement since I've been in the mental health field and in consulting. There's been quite a movement towards wellness in general instead of just doing prevention work. So it includes these positive mental states, emotions, moods, feelings. And I wanted to discriminate a little bit between mental states and or psychological states and feelings. So we often feel sad, angry, disappointed. Those are feelings. You should be able to detect them in your own body, somewhere in your body. Depression is actually a pushing down of emotions, and anxiety is kind of a generalized cluster, I would say, of emotions. So those are 2 psychological states that people often experience, but they're so big and vast that it's really kind of a hard to get a handle on. I'm sure Amber will have some tips for us when we get to her mental health presentation. And if we think of well-being as being more aligned with, say, Chinese traditional medicine, that the notion here is that we create wholeness and harmony within a person, and that allows the body, mind, spirit to heal. And if you think organizationally, in terms of organizational well-being, we are after creating the conditions of wholeness in UTO so that people can be whole and healthy themselves, and that the entity of UTO is whole and healthy. Next slide, please. In my travels, as I was putting these slides together, I came across, look at those tech startups that are about well-being. There's quite an industry here. And we've gotten started a little bit, I think, at UTO, beginning to address these opportunities. But when you get the link to these slides, I encourage you to go to some of these links and read some of these articles, because it is this new $1 trillion market that's available to us, because everybody's looking for not just health, but well-being. Next slide, please. So when Amber does her presentation, some of us will be left with, oh my goodness, what can I do to help? I'm hearing people describe things that I'm hearing maybe cause for concern. And so I'm going to give you 2 different models for how we handle that. And the first one is the dreaded drama triangle. This is some work by a psychologist many years ago, where he identified these 3 roles that we tend to play over and over. We might have a specific one that we kind of default to. And some of you know your Enneagram types well enough that you'd be able to say, oh, that's probably where I go. But in the victim who feels powerless and is not really feeling like they have anything to offer, they also have this relationship with a persecutor, somebody who's doing something to them. So think about our leadership styles and whether we're being persecuting or rescuing someone who finds themselves in a victim stance. Next slide, please. But here's something that's much more aligned to our positive core and our leadership principles, which comes from the work of David Emerald and his work around the empowerment dynamic here. So rather than victim, we can be a creator. We can choose our own responses to things, and we have an attitude that I can and will do things. Rather than there being a persecutor, there can be a challenger, someone who's really calling upon the person that they're concerned about to be more conscious and to think about what they can do rather than what they can't do, which is more the victim stance. And then, of course, we, instead of rescue or coaching, so giving support, but not, it's the teaching them to fish rather than getting them supper. So in this role, the prominent practice is questions, really good inquiry. And it's making sure the person gets all the way, Chris, you'll like this, to how will you do it? How are you going to pull that off? What are the actions that you can take? Any questions about this empowerment dynamic and how we might make use of that at UTO when we're concerned about somebody?
Elicit the like as I'm processing, the challenger and the coach need to see, first of all, they need to be ready to frame it differently as opposed to the last slide. But how do you elicit the trust and the space that it comes forward? Like, is there good tips on that? Because I think that's part of our
Yeah.
How do we bring it forward?
Yeah, from my perspective, and Amber, will you hold that question too, so that when you get to your part, it has everything to do with rapport and whether you can move in and out of that kind of space of connection and trust with each other, and that you have the skills to do that. Maybe that's another thing we can focus on sometime, is just that whole body of work around rapport.
Because I think that's the part, is how do you elicit so it surfaces, and then we can respond in these ways that then help get the change that is necessary. That's okay. Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And if you use the positive core as a guide, those 4 values, if you're embodying all 4 of them, I think you'll be in pretty good shape. It's just not always easy to do that. Amber, do you have anything to add here about how you can help people?
Yeah, and I think that the idea of how to build trust, I think it's an ongoing process, right? So it's building upon different interactions. And so, there's a couple of numbers that I throw out there sometimes when we talk about how to create trust in any relationship. And so there's what we call there's the 5-to-1 ratio, right? So for any unhelpful and restrictive interaction, you want to try to create 5 positive growth-focused interactions, right? And so I think it's helpful to think in line of, not only does that mean, okay, just because this interaction didn't go as I had wanted it to, or maybe we were not connecting, that means, okay, how do I want to create opportunities for us to build trust together? How do I want to sit in presence with this person versus feeling like I have to be direct them one way or another? Maybe I'm just going to listen today. And then I think it's building upon those interactions that helps to create that trust over time.
Nice. I like 5-to-1. That's very nice. That's very actionable.
But I think it's really important, Christine. I mean, you lived this before you joined ASU every day. The parallel that I saw is that when some of the outside influences surfaced, observations that we then started to build rapport around the diversity and equity inclusion discussions. Remember how foreign it was to many of us talking about those things. I have a hunch many of us it's foreign to talk about mental health in a work capacity unless someone goes and creates some sort of HR action that then we're forced to talk about it. So that's kind of, this is helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And Amber, I did you the disservice of tossing the ball to you without introducing you. Would you like to introduce yourself and then you can take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christine. So my name is Amber Wunder. I'm the Assistant Director of the Employee Assistance Office. Lisa Jordan is also here in the meeting, and
Oh, hi, Lisa.
she's there as well. And so she'll be jumping in if she has anything that she wants to add as we move along the way. And she's also one of the counselors in our office.
Awesome.
And so we will, I believe it was Chris, you had mentioned, really addressing the mental health stigma. And so I'm hoping we can talk about that today as well.
Great. I think we're ready for the next slide, unless anybody does have a question. I don't see anything in the chat.
Yeah. And so today we're going to be focusing on what does that look like in the workplace? How can managers and leaders and coworkers who are concerned be able to express that from others? And what are some things that we want to pay attention to on our own? Next slide, please. So these are some of the topics that we'll be covering. The stigma, the stress, how and what to say. I think sometimes it's nice to be able to have the conversation about the importance of it, but having a couple of lines, right? To know like, what are some statements that I can feel comfortable saying? So we'll talk about that and just talk about some mental health in the workplace. Next slide, please. As we move forward, these slides are going to be available. Christine, I think you'll be sending them out to people separately. Is that right? Yeah. And so we'll be sending these out. And so don't feel you have to write anything down. You'll get all the links and we'll be able to talk about that too. If you do have any questions, by all means, let me know. Or if they go into the chat box, I'll check that every once in a while. Or if anybody sees a question, feel free to jump in and let me know. So really understanding that there is a stigma to mental health and substance use disorders, right? And so not just in the workplace, but within our culture. And it does us a disservice because if we're not able to talk about it, then we're sitting with what our own experience is without getting feedback, without getting support. And so really taking a step back and going, all right, it might be that I'm having a challenge, but that's not a weakness, right? We all have challenges in our life. And so sometimes people can view mental health in that light. We all have mental health. We all have issues with our mental health. We all have physical health. We all sometimes have issues with our physical health. I mean, if we look into it, who here has never lost sleep because of worry? Who hasn't lost someone that had great importance to them? Who doesn't know someone in their lives, either coworkers or friends or family members, who hasn't had their own issues with substance use disorder, right? I think that these are aspects that affect our mental health. And so being able to understand that and see how do we open our minds to addressing what is in front of us with assertiveness. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at some of the figures to this. So when we talk about how mental health not only affects us personally or the people that we see, how does it affect the workplace? So if someone has untreated depression, on average, they're losing 22 to 32 days a year of work, right? That's very impactful for their functioning. It's impactful for the department. So being able to recognize that that can have a large impact. Next, please. So when we talk about, we got cut off a little bit, when we talk about high-risk drinkers, I think there's a general misnomer that, everybody that you work with must be doing okay because they're coming to work on a daily basis. Well, the reality is 80% of high-risk drinkers are employed full-time. And so when we talk about high-risk drinking, what we're generally saying is people who fit in this category are at higher risk for having physical issues related to their drinking, emotional and mental health issues related to their drinking, cognitive issues related to their drinking, and a greater likelihood for dependence. And so some general guidelines for that. Men, 14 or more drinks a week or 4 or more drinks at a time would be in that higher risk category. For women, it's 7 or more drinks per week. And more than 3 drinks at a time. So these are some nice general guidelines just to be aware of for yourself and for the people around you. Everybody has their own relationship with alcohol. Some people don't drink alcohol at all, while other people do on a regular basis. So I think just recognizing, okay, I'm going to pay attention to these guidelines. Next, please. And these are the statistics before the pandemic, right? So I want to make a point of that because it's gone up, right? So before the pandemic, 1 in 5 adults had struggled with their mental health, right? 1 in 4 adults had 2 or more chronic health conditions. And then even when we talk about something that was more common, the flu, even something like getting the flu would take people out of work 5 days on average. Right. So when we talk about how our physical health and our mental well-being affects the productivity, our ability to achieve what we're working towards, I think these are all helpful statistics to keep in mind. Any questions so far? Again, yell out, chat, either way is okay. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some signs and symptoms. So this one I'm going to ask people to jump in. So what are some signs or observable traits? So these are the things you're noticing in your coworkers, or you can say noticing in your family or friends. What are some things that you would observe that says, okay, this person might be in distress? What do you notice?
I think one thing I've seen is like days of the week that an individual is late or doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So people aren't showing up, or their attendance is off. Yeah. What else?
It's just unplanned, or it seems random, you know.
Yeah. Some differences in their usual style, their usual work ethic, maybe even, in their attendance. We have quick to anger, difficulty sleeping, right? So you might observe that. Falling asleep on the job, hypersensitivity, so maybe irritability, less patient, changes in behavior, abnormal gait, different ways of relating to other people, changes in communication, low self-esteem. Great. Those are wonderful examples, yes. Poor physical presence or even hygiene. I think that's something that people will see disengagement more. So yes, absolutely. Next. Oh, one more back. Oh, so we're missing some. Okay, so we're missing some of these. So I think a lot of the examples that you gave are those observable traits, right? So the absenteeism, the not producing the same that they were before, the maybe isolating, the difficulty memorizing or following instructions like they were before, sleeping on the job. So those are great examples. What are some of the symptoms? So when we separate signs from symptoms, signs are those things that we observe in others. Symptoms are those things we feel within ourselves, right? So how do we notice our own subjective experience? Or what do we hear from other people that they say, this is what my internal experience is? How do we know when there's a challenge or there's distress going on? What does it feel like within ourselves? What are some examples? So feeling lonely. What else? Maybe worry or sadness, right? Increased worry or sadness, lack of confidence, lack of control, right? Feeling no one can relate, tired, feeling off, right? Scattered, helpless, flight, right? So when we talk about that fight, flight, or freeze response, just feeling that almost the heartbeat racing, the sweating, the shaking, the stomach aches, right? Those are some of those physical ones outside of the emotional. Difficulty prioritizing, difficulty following directions, whether it's a process or actually on a map, right? Those are some great examples of some of those internal subjective experiences. And again, these are very common, right? Who has never felt lonely? Who has never felt tired, right? It's more like when they start to layer on top of each other and it lasts for 2 weeks and we're not getting any relief despite making efforts to do so, that's an indication where there might be something else going on, which it might be helpful to reach out. And so I think that that's helpful for us to know for ourselves, just to keep doing those check-ins. How am I feeling? What's going on? What am I noticing? As well as when you're checking in with someone who you are supporting, right? So being able to do that. Disinterest, that's a good one. Next. So what is my role? So when we're talking about being in that supervisor role, the manager role, the leadership role, here's a couple of tips and ideas. So one, educate yourself about mental health in the workplace. Done, right? So you're already getting that. You're already doing that today. There's some links at the end. You can explore this more ongoing. Asking someone how they're doing. I think more than anything else, the role is to not ignore. So if you're noticing anything, it is how do I address this, not if, and so getting that feedback. So asking someone, how are you doing? And I have some phrases for that later. Being a good listener. So just sitting, it's that active listening skill of how do I just be present? How do I hear what they're saying and be in the moment with them? And then how do I want to guide this conversation if there's something that I feel needs to be addressed? You don't have to fix the issue. I think sometimes when we're in leadership positions, we feel if someone's coming to us with a problem that we need to somehow know how to fix it. And that's not necessarily the case, right? Sometimes it's how do I give you resources that are going to be helpful? And then know your options, know the resources that are available at ASU and then outside in the community. And we'll get into that as well. And I think especially when we talk about understanding the role in being a support to other people within the organization, it sometimes can come down to boundaries and it sometimes can come down to understanding. So the way that I like to describe it is if you are walking outside and you notice that one of the employees that you work with gets hit by a bike, right? And they're sitting on the curb and they're holding their ankle, what do? Right? You go, you sit down, you say, how are you doing? Can I call someone for you? What do you need? What can I do to help you in this moment? What do you need? Right, here are the resources for maybe workman's compensation, or here are the resources for how to take leave. And you would give them time to take care of their medical need, right? And so I don't think mental health is any different, right? So it's a lot of the same steps. So you're not expected to know exactly what's wrong with that person, right? Whether it's a sprain or an ankle breaks, just like mental health, you don't need to know what the issue is. You're not expected to put a cast on that person's ankle, right? You're not the doctor to be able to do that. You might give them time because maybe they were supposed to walk across campus to give a presentation. You might give them time or help them find a different way to prioritize their schedule to meet the medical need that's in front of them, right? So you might do something along that way. If you see them later in the week and they're still limping, you would check in, how you doing, right? Is there anything else that I can do to be supportive? Here are some other resources that I thought of. Check back, see how they're doing. Same thing with mental health. And then if, maybe this person was supposed to drive the cart or that's part of their job. Well, if they're unable to do that because of an injury, you would talk about what their options are, right? And work through that with that and seeing how to make sure that the functions of the job still get met while accommodating the situation that's in front of you both, right? And so I think that, you wouldn't be able to mandate that they see a doctor. You wouldn't be able to say, this is the thing you have to do to fix your ankle. You would be there as a support, help them talk through their options. I think that's the same thing. And so when we talk about boundaries, it's that recognition of what are the choices I make and what are the choices they need to make. Any questions about that? Okay. Next slide, please.
I had an observation, and that is that we're kind of couching the conversation in terms of mental health versus mental illness. And I think a lot of the things that were listed in the chat are normal reactions to things that are happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
And so I think, there's stigma attached. Want to be hesitant to label somebody as mentally ill if they are reacting in a way that normal people react to stressful situations.
Yeah.
So And I just wanted to make that point. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Thank you for pointing that out. I think you're right in that they're very natural reactions. And so you as a leader, you as someone who's supporting other people, you don't need to know, is there more beyond what we're talking about? Or is this that they're having a lot of stress? It's either way, it still might be helpful for them to talk to someone. And I think recognizing that, that we all feel lonely sometimes. We all feel sad sometimes. It's more as, how is this affecting my functioning? And if it is affecting my functioning, or I'm seeing it affect the functioning of other people, how do I want to take care of myself so that I'm able to care for myself? Even if there's other things going on around me that I can't control, how do I want to take a step back? How do I want to make sure that I'm doing okay? Right? So it's not the reaction that is necessarily or mental illness so much as it's mental health. It's that making sure that you're taking care of yourself if any of these symptoms are disrupting. So yeah, that kind of go along with what you were thinking.
Yeah, but also, somebody doesn't necessarily need to have a broken ankle to sit down next to them and say, is your ankle sore? I mean, in that case, it doesn't make a lot of sense to walk around asking people if their ankle's sore. But you get my
if
point.
you're noticing something, if say you didn't witness the whole thing, and you just saw a friend or a coworker and they were limping, you'd probably go, "Oh, are you all right?" Right? It doesn't have to be that you witness something, right? It doesn't have to be that there's something so intense that you have to recognize. Is that what you're thinking? It's more like just being able to sit with someone and check in.
Well, also, just walking around, checking, just make it a normal practice to check in on people, even if they're not outwardly exhibiting, symptoms or signs.
What Nate's bringing up is one of my questions is, how do you ask, how are you doing in, where it's easier in the Zoom session I found with a one-on-one. But when you're walking by someone and passing in the physical environment in the old world, so many people just say, how are you doing? And it's not really meant to get a response.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is there a great way to kind of elicit the feedback?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes to your question about trust too. And so I think Nathan's point and the point that you're taking have a bit of a connection here, which is part of the way that you build trust is just check in with people, right? And so it doesn't have to be because something happened so much as, hey, just wanted to see how you're doing, what's going on. Supervisions are a great time to do that. You can also do that outside of that time period, but just opening that conversation and saying, I'm really interested in how you've been doing. I'm really interested in what you've been working on. I'm very interested in that. I will answer your question. Next slide, and then I think this will help answer that question for you, Chris. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, go back one. Okay, thank you. What can I say? So these are some of those non-judgmental conversation starters I've noticed, right? So this might be something you've noticed small, or it might be something that's been going on a little bit more. I've noticed. Are you okay? Right? Can I call someone for you? I think that's if you're seeing that someone is in distress, right? Being able to say, can I call someone for you? Or who can I call for you? Being able to just be able to say out front, I'm concerned for you. I'm worried. These are some things that I'm noticing and I wanted to check in with you, right? Can I help you find someone to talk to? And by that, we're not saying that you have to find all of the resources in the community. This would be a good referral to the employee assistance office, right? I know that there's an office that we have, they're completely confidential. Would it be helpful to take some time to talk to them? If someone is in a higher level of distress and they might not be able to do that themselves, would you like us to call together, right? Being able to connect them to that resources. What do you need? So does that answer your question, Chris, as far as how to just start that conversation and then let people respond how they will, right? Because you're opening the door. And if you consistently do that and just saying, hey, just checking in, they'll be more likely to walk through when they need to. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of it is making sure you have time. If you're just running to the restroom, it's and you ask the question, you might not, I might not be doing it in a way where I'm really looking for an answer, because I'm just saying it's a way to say hi. It's another way to say hi. But like these are ways to really bring it forward where you're sincere in the response too. So.
Yeah, and so I think
in your ask, right? You need to be intentional. If you're going to ask somebody how they are, you need to be intentional in making that time to say, or we need to change the way we say hi, so we don't ask how are you doing when we know we don't have time to listen to that response.
yeah, I think that's a great idea. So it's not just what do we say, but also making sure that we're going to say what we're prepared to follow up with, right? And so being able to do that, and just checking in. And this goes back to the trust. If you're quickly passing someone and it might not be necessarily a time where you can do that part of sitting down, how you're doing, and being able to listen fully. Another thing to do, throwing it out there, statement of gratitude, right? Hey, I just wanted to thank you, by the way, for that, that project that you helped me on, or that thing that you do in an authentic way. Right. So being able to make a connection with someone in towards that trust that isn't necessarily always feeling like you need to check in on how they're coping, right? It becomes, or how they're doing. It's just hey, making that connection one-on-one with another person. Right. Next slide, please. So this is the uncomfortable questions, but they really need to be done when there's a reason. So, for instance, you are noticing some changes in the symptoms that people are having, or the signs that you're observing, and you have concerns about a coworker or someone you support, and you're worried that they might be thinking about suicide. I think there's a myth that if you ask them about it, you're somehow putting the thought in their head. That is a myth. Right? There is plenty of research that has shown that by asking someone, it reduces their risk of suicide. And so really being able to just put the question out in an assertive way. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you suicidal? Are you considering suicide? And they might say, no. And you go, okay, I just wanted to check in. I was concerned and I wanted to make sure that you and I got a chance to talk. But if they are, it opens a door, right? And the reason why I say it assertively and I give specific ways of saying this is because sometimes, because it can be uncomfortable if we're not used to it, right? And again, this is not a question that we ask people all the time. So it's understandable that it might be uncomfortable. People will tend to shy away, right? So they might think, they might say something, oh, you're not thinking about doing anything dumb, are you? Right? So at one point it's leading and another point it's judgmental. Right? Chances are they're not going to answer you even if they were about it, right? Or even being vague. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself? That's vague, right? There's different types of self-harm that isn't suicide. So really just being able to ask this question, I think this is one of the hardest questions that we've gotten, that supervisors or managers will ask, how do I ask this question? And it really is just being very upfront about it. And that way you can help to get that connection going as well, to move forward and get them some resources. Any questions about this slide?
I have a quick question. Especially in the workplace, sometimes it's really hard to broach these types of topics or feel like you're not crossing a line. You know what I mean? Like, when do you kind of enter into that territory with somebody without making them feel like you're not being professional? I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say. It's just sometimes can be kind of hard to broach these in a professional way.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to you might be seeing something because of the role that you have that other people don't. And so being able to check in is just it's more help. It's been shown to be more helpful than holding off as far as concerns about being professional. And so one of the ways that you can lead in, or even some of the things that I might say, is, sometimes when people are going through a lot in their lives, or they're having a lot of work stress, they might have thoughts about suicide, Are you considering suicide? Right? And just being able to put it out there. And that's part of what we have the ability to do, is check in with people on it. Or I'm really concerned. I heard this statement and it was concerning to me. So I wanted to check in with you because I know that this can come up for people. Are you thinking about suicide? And then if it's a no, then it's a no. And if they say, you know, I don't want to talk about it, at least you've broached it so that even if someone doesn't walk through that door, they know that you are okay saying it out loud, and you might be a safe place for them to share. And therefore you, again, don't need to fix, but then you get to make sure that they know what resources are available to them. Does that kind of answer that question for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions on this way? Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so it says what works, and then it says treatment options. So it's in a different color than the screen. So what works in treatment options for this one? So a general understanding when mental health concerns come up, some of the treatment modalities, counseling, medication, combination of both. Again, it's not up to you to figure out what other people need so much as it's just helpful to understand that when people sit and with the thing that keeps people from reaching out is shame and the stigma. And the main problem is that what we need in order to heal is connection and being able to speak openly. And so when that shame and the stigma keeps us from doing that, you know, saying, maybe I'm having a hard time sleeping and it's been going on for a while, or I'm having worries or anxiety that's really getting in the way of me being able to be productive, or I'm having a really hard time getting out of bed. Those are those things where if we're not able to know that we can reach out and talk to someone, it's going to make it harder for us to care for ourselves. And so a lot of times the informal supports, friends, coworkers, that can be enough. And when it's not, there's treatment options. So there's counseling and medication that can also be helpful for that. Next slide, please. All right, time to practice. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to break everyone up into groups of 3. So one person is going to be the manager or supervisor. One person is going to be the employee, and one person will be the observer and be able to offer feedback as we go along. I'm going to give a scenario, and then everybody, I'll do that for like 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and everybody will be able to talk about what they noticed. So next slide, please. So this is the case study. So John has worked with you for 2 years. He is generally a great guy and always been a very good employee. He has been acting out of character the last few weeks, sending long rambling emails at all hours of the day and night. He has been short and verbally aggressive with people while in the office. You have had 2 general complaints about his behavior come to your attention, but nothing of great concern. John called out sick most of last week and is set to come in Monday. You schedule a meeting to talk to him and he comes in and reports, I was in the hospital last week. I have the bipolar disorder. So some questions to get you set off. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. It really is just explore. So do you want to address his behavior during the past few weeks? Do you want to ensure John has all the necessary resources and supports at his disposal? Do you want to end the story and thank him for his honesty? He seems fine now. What else is there to do at this point? Or do you want to find and reach out for some resources? What could those be to assist with this situation? So if we could break everybody into breakout rooms with 3 people in there, and go ahead and jump in those rooms, and we will come back and talk about what you came up with.
How long are the breakout rooms going to be?
For 10 minutes.
Thank you.
And take turns if you want to.
Are we being automatic?
Hey, Chris, you're still in the main room here.
I am.
If you like, you should have a breakout room button at the bottom.
Yeah, no, it just says to join one of them. But did we put everyone into 3 breakouts?
Is that what we were trying to go for?
I think she wanted everyone broken into groups of 3.
Oh, okay. Let me close these rooms really quick. 1 second.
Yeah. Sorry about that, everyone. I was just talking to the team. I think we didn't follow directions, so we're going to do this over again in a
All right.
second.
Just be a moment here.
And I think, Amber, you wanted people in groups of 3, correct?
Correct.
Not 3 rooms, right? All right.
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing breakouts for the guild topic next, and these sounded like we jumped into that setup.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Crossover. I'm just happy I'm not the one to do it because I wouldn't have been able to even get started with the breakout room. So.
All right, so Shane, let's try it again. Let's do it into, I guess we'll need probably, looks like we have 40 people, so 13 groups of 3, 1 group of 4.
No problem. The other breakout rooms are still closing. Just another 10 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Yeah, no problem.
So we probably need, oh, that's right, we had 46, so.
It's okay, Zoom will do the math.
Yeah.
Math
One
is
group
hard.
of 4.
I wasn't prepared for those. Antonio.
It's working. We have issues with that today.
Okay.
Try.
So go ahead and put hands up if you would want to address this behavior during the past few weeks. So kind of do some hand signals. We got a one. Couple. Yeah, got a thumbs up. Yep.
Yes, I did.
So I would say a little less than half would want to do that. So who would like to share why that they think that this is something that they would want to talk about? And then also who is someone who kind of keep it in mind?
Lisa, I've had luck in this room right over here.
Would? Oh, yeah. So
John was talking to someone else, I think.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't mind sharing. And maybe that's partly because I did have an employee once who struggled with this. And I think outside of getting help for the situation that's happening, it could damage relationships, not just the behavior that happened before, but potential future behavior too. And so I would really want to support that individual in talking through what happened and and making sure he has a plan for the future and how to make sure that it doesn't negatively damage relationships at work because of those actions in the past and potential if something were to happen in the future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. How about someone, Gigi, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say something very similar. I have had that happen, and I found it to be, it worked very well that the person did share that information, and I was just so grateful that they trusted me enough to share that. So I expressed that first and then said, I'm so glad that you brought this up, and just kind of run down why I wanted to meet with them, because they did affect other people, and I didn't want those people to have this negative, for exactly what Michelle said, this negative impact that he didn't realize he was creating because he was in his own space. And so just try to help him through that. And we had a very long conversation, and it worked out very well, actually.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing your experiences. Is there anybody that wants to speak about why they might not bring it up?
So I guess I'd have to have I don't know, because there's a stigma sometimes behind bipolar or certain mental health disorders. I would just want that person to understand that I support them. I wouldn't want to either, share information that they don't feel comfortable with other people knowing, just really making sure they feel supported, but not judged, or that they're going to be treated differently because they've shared something. But which is why you're kind of torn, like you probably do need to address what happened previously, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't make them feel like their mental health issue is, they've done something wrong? I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah. So does that, when Gigi and Michelle kind of shared their experiences, that kind of give some clarity for what other people might think about doing in the future? Like how to bring it up? Has anybody ever had to voluntarily bring it up with someone? Or, and again, not to share specifics, but if anybody have any experience maybe in engaging in a conversation with an employee where mental health was part of your concerns and what you wanted to make sure that they were doing okay?
I'll say I've had this conversation a number of times, not necessarily specifically about this mental health challenge, but one of the resources I've constantly relied on in this life and previous is the Employee Assistance Program. Also, the other big thing is empathy and understanding. Sometimes it's about behavior, and you don't necessarily excuse the behavior, but you acknowledge the behavior and you recognize that and you encourage and compliment that your employee has identified that they've got a challenge and that they're working on it. So if you can continue to always be supportive in that fashion, and then reinforce that you're not attacking the employee, but you're instead addressing the behaviors and helping to give the employee the tools necessary to prevent the behaviors from having a negative impact on the workspace.
Yeah, right. And I think that, thank you, Lane, the connection of addressing the behaviors versus the person. It's not that there's something wrong with the person, it's that these are the behaviors that you're noticing and that you're hoping to discuss together and figuring out what you want to do moving forward. Yeah. What are some of the resources so Lane, you mentioned the Employee Assistance Office, and I'll address that briefly in a moment. But after that, any other resources that people have used or referred to? What do you know is out there for maybe this situation? Okay. So will John be needing FMLA in the future, right? It might be so that he might need to do some counseling that he might need intermittent FMLA for. If this comes up in the future, does John know how to apply for FMLA if he does need to go inpatient again, right? Is there any ADA accommodations that need to happen? So I think let's go to the resources and then we'll work through that. Any questions about this scenario or something that kind of sparked while we were talking before we move on? Okay, all right.
On the resources side, I ask, do they have any relationships with any of the UTO HR resources? And I remind them that that's a great start, because oftentimes they might have a relationship with the ASU resources, the broader ones. And it would be good to get the comfort. It'd be good to get the specificity of the resources from people they know and trust already. So
yeah. So starting with the people that are closer to them, that they might feel more comfortable, and then working out as needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. All right, next slide. Gonna move past study 1 and we're gonna go back next after study 2. And so some of the resources next. So these are some of the external resources outside of ASU that you can get more information on mental health, where you can just find general great information. So these are some of the trusted sources. I think sometimes we want to look things up online and there's so much information that it can feel overwhelming. So these are some great resources if you're interested in looking up any specifics about mental health. The last 2 numbers, the National Suicide Hotline and the Maricopa Crisis Line. So the National Suicide Hotline is the larger one. Maricopa Crisis Line is the one that's going to have more information for the specific resources that are here and in this area. Both of them are 24 hours, 7 days a week. If you have concerns about an employee, you know, there's been plenty of times where something will happen on the weekend and a supervisor might receive an email or something is being said and they're very concerned and they don't know what to do or who to reach out to, or even for a family member or even for yourself. If that comes up, you can always call this line, the Maricopa Crisis Line. And if you are for yourself, they can help you find resources. If you're concerned about somebody else based on maybe something they said or an email they've sent, they can walk through your options as a support to this other person too. So I think that that's not only for the person who's in crisis, but also for the people who are supporting the person who's in crisis. Next, please. These are some of these internal resources. Feel free to look these over. Students and student workers have different resources, and so I listed those as well. So these are the different partners within ASU, the Office of Human Resources Partners, and then of course, next slide, the Employee Assistance Office. These are some of the services that we offer. So we can do an initial assessment if someone schedules an appointment for us, and then if short-term counseling would be appropriate to the situation, we can do another 5 sessions. There's no cost. It's available for all benefits eligible faculty and staff and their dependents. And then also we do consults. So supervisors will call us if any of you at any point are concerned and want to address it but unsure how, that's a consult. So we can do a consult with someone over the phone. We can talk through what are your options, how you would say that, what are some things you want to be aware of. If you're concerned but you don't know if there's something that you want to address, it's a confidential place to be able to talk about it with a mental health provider. So feel free to give us a call. Or you can reach out via my email address. But other than that, it is 3 o'clock. And so I will say thank you very much. If you have any other questions, feel free to let me know, or you can email Lisa or I, or give our office a call, phone number 480-965-2271. Otherwise, Employee Assistance Office. You can just find us on the ASU directory.
Can I ask Amber one quick question before she goes? Sorry.
No.
For after hours support, right now our office, because we're open 24 hours and we have employees within our office and outside of our office that will call us, and we leverage the Impact group for after hours. Is that still something, or do you know anything about the after hours support? Or maybe I can ask you offline about that. But.
The after hours support is generally more through the student side. So that's not something that's through ASU. The student counseling, the counseling services through ASU has a special contract with Impact. And so they're able to do that. It doesn't necessarily apply to employees, although I can check, but I don't believe it applies towards employees.
Okay, I use it for one of mine, but I think she was a student too, even though she was a full-time staff member. But they really helped her and they stayed on the phone with her for like 2 hours because she had a situation where she was suicidal, but they did help her. But if you have anything for staff that we should be redirecting, or that would
be. Through our office, we don't offer after hours. I will say that Maricopa Crisis Line that you connect to, Impact is affiliated with them.
Oh, okay.
So the same line. So if you have someone on the phone and you want them to be able to talk, they can call that. You can call that Maricopa Crisis Line. It's the same people. And if they need to send someone out to do an in-person assessment, they can do that through the Maricopa Crisis Line. There's a separate contract through Impact for ASU on the counseling side, where they have to come within a certain amount of time, and they have a different process. But if anybody calls the Maricopa Crisis Line, they can, if someone needs direct assessment in person, they will still send people out. So it's a similar team. It's just not the same procedures as on the counseling services side.
Okay, so I'll have to update our things for the Maricopa Crisis Line. Okay,
so it's another resource.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know you all have to go, but I'll hang out if you do.
We're just transitioning into another subset. If you want to hang out, maybe they can ask questions in the chat box and you can answer them that way too. That'd be
all right,
cool.
If that's okay with me hearing the next subset, and then if you see no questions, I'll go ahead and jump out.
Great, thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.